The poor waitress gave her last $5 to a lonely man, unaware he was the city's most powerful single-dad CEO. "You expect me to be seen with this?" The biting cold of the November evening seemed to seep through the very glass of the small, brightly lit cafe, a relentless chill that mirrored the one spreading through Alara Vance's chest. The rain hammered down on the pavement outside like 1,000 desperate fists, its relentless rhythm a soundtrack to the slow, painful shattering of her hope. Her date, a man named Julian whose crisp, impeccable suit seemed to mock her own threadbare coat, gestured dismissively at her, his lip curled in a sneer of pure disdain. He had a polished, cruel sort of beauty, the kind that advertised wealth and a complete absence of compassion. The silence deepened. "You do not belong here," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous thing meant only for her. He stood, threw a few bills on the table to cover his own expensive coffee, and walked away without a backward glance. He was gone. Alara sat frozen, the heat of humiliation a stark contrast to the cold that had settled deep in her bones. Each quiet chuckle from a nearby table felt like a physical blow, each averted gaze a fresh wave of shame. She felt hollow, a fragile shell in the warm, amber hue of the cafe. Her hands, pale and trembling, were clenched in her lap around the single, crumpled $5 bill she had saved for a week, a pathetic treasure she had hoped would be the key to a simple cup of tea and perhaps a moment of human connection. Now it felt like a brand, a symbol of her failure. She had skipped 2 meals for this. She had worn her only decent sweater, mended so many times the elbows were more thread than fabric. She had dared to hope, and this was her reward, to be publicly discarded like refuse. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She winced. Through the shimmering blur of her unshed tears, her gaze drifted to the man at the adjacent table. He sat alone in the corner, shrouded in the deep shadows cast by a flickering lamp. He was older, his face etched with a weary, haunted expression that seemed to absorb all the light around it. His clothes were simple, worn but clean, and he stared into a cup of black coffee with an intensity that suggested it held the answers to the universe. He hadn't touched it. It was surely as cold as the despair that radiated from him. His shoulders were slumped, a portrait of unspoken grief. He looked, she thought with a pang of raw empathy, even more alone than she felt. A sob caught in her throat. As she watched, he slowly pulled a worn leather wallet from his pocket. He didn't open it to pay. Instead, he took out a small, dog-eared photograph of a smiling woman and a little girl with bright, laughing eyes. His thumb stroked the image with a tenderness that was unbearable to witness. His own eyes glistened with a profound, sacred sorrow. He didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything. Something inside Alara shifted. Her own humiliation, so sharp and seismic only moments before, seemed to recede, replaced by a wave of pure, selfless compassion. She saw not a stranger, but a fellow soul drowning in the same silent ocean of pain. Her $5 bill was all she had. It was her bus fare home in the pounding rain. It was the price of a loaf of bread that would have to last her and her little sister, Lily, for 3 days. It was everything. And yet, in that moment, it felt like nothing compared to the crushing weight of the man's unspoken grief. She took a deep, steady breath, her quiet resolve solidifying. She stood up, her movements dignified despite the trembling in her limbs. She walked not to the door, but to the counter, her worn boots making no sound on the polished floor. "A cup of hot tea, the strongest you have," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And one of those almond pastries, please." The warmth from the display case was a stark contrast to her chilled hands as she pushed her last $5 across the counter. The coin clattered. She took the small tray, the scent of bergamot and toasted almonds a cruel reminder of her own empty stomach. She approached the man's table, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He looked up as her shadow fell over him, his eyes hollow and startled. They were the color of a stormy sea, deep and full of wreckage. She didn't say a word. Words were useless things against such profound sorrow. Instead, She placed the steaming cup of tea and the warm pastry gently on his table, next to his cold coffee. For a split second, their eyes met. She offered a small, sincere smile, a fragile offering of light against his darkness. Then, before he could speak, before he could protest, she turned and walked away. The soft click of the cafe door closing behind her echoed in the sudden, sterile silence. She stepped out into the relentless, hammering rain, pulling her threadbare coat tighter around her, and vanished into the night. Alistair Finch froze. The warmth from the teacup seeped into his cold, numb fingers, a sensation so foreign he almost flinched. He stared at the pastry, its golden, flaky crust dusted with sugar, and the fragrant steam rising from the tea, a stark, vibrant reality in the gray fog of his existence. For a full minute he did not move, his mind struggling to process the event. He had come to this nondescript cafe, as he often did, dressed in the worn clothes of a man who had nothing, seeking the anonymity of the crowd to properly drown in his grief. It was the anniversary of the day he had lost his wife, Sarah, and their daughter, Amelia, had lost her mother. The world had become a transactional, cynical place for him, a cavernous mansion filled with gleaming, polished surfaces and the sterile silence of loss. People wanted his money, his power, his name. No one saw the shattered man inside. Until now. This girl, this fragile creature with eyes that held the weight of her own desperate hardship, had been publicly humiliated. He had watched the entire cruel exchange, a familiar disgust twisting in his gut at the casual cruelty of the wealthy young man. He had seen her flinch, had seen the single tear she tried to hide. He had expected her to flee, to crumble. He had not expected this. He had not expected an act of pure, selfless kindness. She had nothing. He had seen the crumpled bill in her hand, had understood instinctively that it was her last, and she had spent it on him. A stranger, a ghost haunting a corner table. A wave of something hot and cathartic washed over him, splintering the ice that had encased his heart for 2 long years. It was a feeling so potent, so raw, it felt like being brought back to life with a violent seismic jolt. His chest tightened. He looked around the cafe, but she was truly gone. The only evidence she had ever been there was the tea, the pastry, and a small, flimsy receipt left on the tray. He picked it up with trembling fingers. It was just a slip of paper, detailing her small purchase, but to him it felt like a sacred artifact. It was a clue. It was a promise. It was a sign that goodness still existed in this hollow world. He looked down at the photograph of Sarah and Amelia. Sarah's smile seemed to shine a little brighter. He imagined telling her about this girl, this angel in a threadbare coat. A single hot tear, the first he had shed in a year, fell from his eye and landed on the receipt. It did not smudge the ink. He carefully folded the piece of paper and tucked it into his wallet, next to the picture of his wife. He would protect it. He would find her. He would repay this singular, profound kindness, this unspoken gift that had cracked open his world and let the light back in. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she lived. But Alistair Finch, the commanding CEO of Finch Enterprises, a man who could move mountains with a single phone call, had just been given a new purpose. He would find her. Total silence. Alara's apartment was little more than a small, cold room with a mattress on the floor and a single window that looked out onto a brick wall. The pounding rain was a muffled, dreary sound here, a constant reminder of the storm both outside and within her. The warmth of the cafe had long since faded, and the biting cold of her reality settled back in. She had no bus fare, so she had walked the 40 blocks home, her worn shoes soaked through, her thin coat offering little protection. Now, she sat on the edge of her mattress, shivering, listening to the soft, shallow breaths of her little sister, Lily, who slept soundly in the small bed beside hers. Lily's face, pale and gaunt from her chronic illness, was peaceful in sleep, a small, innocent angel in a world that felt increasingly cruel. Looking at her, Alara felt her own despair recede. Her hunger, her humiliation, her aching feet. None of it mattered as much as Lily's safety. Her love for her sister was an unwavering, steady flame in the darkness. She had made a choice in that cafe. A foolish choice, a practical mind would say. Her $5 could have bought a small bag of rice and some broth, enough to keep them fed for a few more days. Instead, she had given it away. But as she replayed the haunted look in the stranger's eyes, the profound, unspoken grief that clung to him like a shroud, she felt no regret. She had seen a soul in deeper pain than her own and had offered the only comfort she could. It was a small act, insignificant to the world, but it felt right. Felt human. Still, the consequence was real. She opened her small pantry. It contained a half-empty box of crackers and a few tea bags. That was all. She ate 2 dry crackers, forcing them down her tight throat, and told herself it was enough. She would find a way. She always did. She would pick up an extra shift at the dishwashing job that left her hands raw and aching. She would endure the condescending glares and impatient sighs. She would survive. For Lily, she pulled the thin, worn blanket up to her chin. Sleep did not come easily. Miles away, in a stately, cavernous mansion overlooking the city, Alistair Finch sat in a polished leather chair in his silent, ornate study. The city lights twinkled below like a blanket of fallen stars, a world away from Alara's brick wall. He had not touched the pastry, but he had drunk the tea, every last drop, as if it were a life-giving elixir. The simple warmth had spread through him, a gentle glow that held the coldness of his grief at bay. On his gleaming mahogany desk lay the small receipt, smoothed out and placed under a crystal paperweight as if it were a priceless document. Beside it was a sleek, crisp file, delivered by his head of security less than an hour after he had made the call. The man, a former intelligence agent, had been given a single task: find the girl from the cafe. Using the cafe's security footage and the timestamp on the receipt, it had been remarkably, almost disappointingly, easy for a man of his resources. The file read, Alara Vance. He opened it, his heart thudding in his chest. He read about the tragic death of her parents in a car crash 5 years ago, leaving her, at 18, the sole guardian of her then 7-year-old sister. He read about Lily's rare autoimmune disease, the mounting medical bills, the endless struggle. He saw the address of her tiny, run-down apartment. He saw the list of menial jobs she worked, the long hours, the pitiful pay. He saw a life of quiet, dignified desperation, of selfless sacrifice, of unwavering love. And nowhere in the file, nowhere in the cold, hard facts of her existence, was there any room for the kind of pure, unsolicited kindness she had shown him. It shouldn't exist in a person so beaten down by life. Yet it did. Washed over him, profound and humbling. This woman, who had every reason to be bitter and cynical, who was fighting a desperate battle every single day, had used her last few dollars to comfort a stranger. He looked at the picture of his own smiling daughter, Amelia, asleep in her sprawling, luxurious bedroom down the hall. He had given Amelia everything material, but what Alara was giving her sister, total, selfless devotion, was something money could not buy. A new, fierce, protective instinct rose in him, undeniable and commanding. He would not just repay her. He would become her guardian angel. He picked up his phone. He had work to do. The first miracle arrived 3 days later. Alara was scrubbing pots in the back of a greasy diner kitchen, her hands submerged in murky water, when her landlord appeared. He was a portly, perpetually scowling man who usually only showed up to threaten eviction. Today, however, he was beaming, a wide, unsettling smile on his face. "Miss Vance," he boomed, startling her. "Good news. Clerical error, it seems. You were overcharged for the last 6 months. We owe you a refund." He pressed a thick envelope of cash into her soapy hand. "And your rent for the next year has been taken care of by an anonymous donation to our tenant support fund." He winked, as if they were sharing a delightful secret. Alara stared at the money, then at his retreating back, her mind reeling. Disbelief warred with a desperate, surging hope. It was enough. It was more than enough to buy Lily's expensive medication and stock their pantry with real, nutritious food. She felt a sob of pure, cathartic relief bubble up in her chest. She didn't understand it. Felt like magic. The second miracle came a week after that. A large, unmarked box appeared outside their apartment door. Inside, nestled in soft packaging, was a 3-month supply of Lily's specific medication, a specialized air purifier for her room, and a collection of gourmet, easy-to-digest foods. There was also a small, simple note, with typewritten words. A gift from someone who believes in kindness. Lily's eyes, usually so weary, widened with innocent delight at the sight of the healthy soups and soft bread. "Are we rich now, Alara?" she whispered, her voice full of awe. Alara hugged her sister tight, her own tears soaking into Lily's soft hair. "No, sweetie," she whispered back, her voice thick with emotion. "We're just lucky. Someone out there is very, very kind." She had no idea who it could be. The thought of the sad man in the cafe flickered through her mind, but she dismissed it as a fantasy. He had looked as lost as she was. He couldn't be her hidden savior. From a sleek, black car parked across the street, Alistair Finch watched the light in their small window, a soft golden glow in the encroaching twilight. He saw the silhouette of Alara hugging her sister, and a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the car's heater. This was better than closing any multi-billion-dollar deal. This was real. He was healing them, and in doing so, he was beginning to heal himself. Alistair knew he couldn't remain a ghost in her life forever. He wanted to know her, to hear her voice, to see the light return to her haunted eyes up close. He orchestrated their next meeting with the same meticulous precision he used for a corporate merger. He learned from his file that she spent her one afternoon off each week volunteering at a small, local library, reading to children. It was a detail that made his heart ache with a tender, profound respect. The following Sunday, he dressed not as a CEO, but in a simple, soft cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked like a university professor or an architect, approachable, gentle. He took his own daughter, 6-year-old Amelia, with him. Amelia, with her mother's bright eyes and a spirit that had been too subdued by grief, clutched his hand, her expression curious. "Why are we here, Daddy?" she asked. "I wanted to meet someone," he said, his voice soft. "Someone very special." They entered the library's quiet, sun-drenched children's section, just as Alara was finishing a story. She sat on a small stool, surrounded by a circle of enraptured children, her voice soft and melodic. The afternoon light caught the dust motes dancing in the air, creating a golden glow around her. She looked different from the fragile, shattered woman in the cafe. Here, she was serene, a quiet, steady presence. When she finished the story and the children scattered, he approached her, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calmer than he felt. Alara looked up, and her eyes widened in recognition. A soft gasp escaped her lips. "You," she whispered. "From the cafe?" "I am," he said, a gentle smile touching his lips. "I never had the chance to thank you," he gestured to Amelia, who was hiding shyly behind his leg. "This is my daughter, Amelia." Alara's gaze softened as she looked at the little girl. She knelt down, bringing herself to Amelia's level. "Hello, Amelia," she said, her voice a warm, gentle murmur. "It's so nice to meet you. I love your sparkly shoes." Amelia won over instantly, peeked out and offered a small, shy smile. I hope you enjoyed the tea," Alara said, rising, a faint blush on her pale cheeks. She was looking at him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "It was more than just tea," Alistair replied, his voice low and sincere. "You have no idea what your kindness meant to me that day. It was a very dark day. You were a light." The raw sincerity in his voice seemed to break through her reserve. She gave him a small, genuine smile, and for the first time, he saw the true, unspoiled beauty that her hardship had tried so hard to conceal. "I'm glad," she said simply. They stood in a comfortable, unspoken silence for a moment, the soft hush of the library around them. He knew he couldn't reveal everything, not yet. He needed to earn her trust. "My name is Alistair," he said, extending a hand. "Alara," she replied, placing her small, calloused hand in his. Her touch was like a spark, a jolt of warmth that traveled straight to his soul. It was in that quiet, sunlit corner of a dusty library that their two shattered worlds began, ever so gently, to merge. He had found his angel. Now he had to learn how to keep her. They began to meet regularly after that, first for quiet cups of coffee in unassuming cafes, which he always insisted on paying for, and then for long, meandering walks in the park as the last of the autumn leaves fell. He told her he was a freelance business consultant, a half-truth that allowed him to explain his flexible schedule without revealing the sheer scale of his wealth and power. With every conversation, the bond between them deepened, forged in the crucible of shared grief. One crisp afternoon, sitting on a park bench under the golden glow of the setting sun, he finally shared the story of his wife. He spoke of Sarah, his college sweetheart, of her vibrant laugh and her passion for life, and of the drunk driver who had stolen it all away in a brutal, senseless instant. For 2 years, he confessed, his voice cracking, I've been living in a black and white world. The color just vanished. My house is just a house. My work is just a distraction. Even my daughter. I love her more than life itself, but I was failing her. I was a ghost, just going through the motions. He looked at Alara, his eyes raw and vulnerable. That night in the cafe, you were the first splash of color I'd seen since the accident. You reminded me that goodness, that light, still existed. Alara listened with an unwavering, steady gaze, her empathy a tangible thing, a warm blanket against the cold of his memories. She didn't offer empty platitudes or trite reassurances. She simply listened, her presence a safe harbor. When he finished, she reached out and gently placed her hand on his, a simple, profound gesture of connection. Then, feeling seen and safe in a way she hadn't with anyone since her parents died, she shared her own tragedy. She spoke of the sudden, shocking loss of her parents, of being thrown into adulthood overnight, of her terror and her fierce, protective love for Lily. She spoke of her dream of being an artist, a painter, a dream she had packed away in a dusty box along with her canvases and brushes, because survival had to come first. Sometimes, she admitted, her voice a soft, trembling whisper, the weight feels unbearable. I feel like I'm holding my breath, just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. It's hard to believe in a future when you're fighting so hard just to get through the present. He saw the immense, quiet strength beneath her fragile exterior, the pure, unyielding core of her. They sat there as dusk settled, two lonely souls bound by a sacred, unspoken understanding. He was falling in love with her, not just for her kindness, but for her resilience, her gentle heart, her unwavering spirit. And he knew, with an undeniable certainty, that he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never had to fight for her future again. The opportunity for a grander salvation presented itself in the most unexpected way. Lily's doctors recommended a new, experimental treatment, a procedure that offered real hope for a cure but came with a staggering price tag. The anonymous donations had helped, but this was a sum far beyond anything Alara could ever hope to earn. Desperate, she took on a second job, working as a waitress for a high-end catering company. Her first assignment was a massive charity gala, the social event of the season, held in the cavernous, ornate ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel. The irony was not lost on her. She would be serving champagne and canapes to people who wore the cost of Lily's treatment on their wrists. The evening was a blur of gleaming marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and the drone of polite, meaningless conversation. Alara, dressed in a simple, crisp black uniform, moved through the sea of silks and jewels like a ghost, her face a polite, neutral mask. She didn't know that the gala was being hosted by Finch Enterprises. She didn't know that Alistair, in a flawlessly tailored tuxedo that broadcast his commanding presence, was the guest of honor. He saw her the moment she walked into the ballroom, and his heart clenched. He saw the weary tightness around her eyes, the dignified set of her jaw. He wanted to stride across the room, pull her into his arms, and tell her it was all over, that she never had to serve another person again. But the moment wasn't right. And then fate intervened in the cruelest way possible. As Alara navigated the crowded room with a tray of champagne flutes, a guest lurched backward, bumping her arm hard. The tray tilted. A single glass of champagne arced through the air, landing directly on the pristine, white silk gown of Mrs. Eleanor Davenport, a notoriously cruel society matron known for her sharp tongue and elitist disdain. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The music faltered. Total silence. Mrs. Davenport looked down at the spreading stain on her dress, her face contorting into a mask of theatrical fury. "You clumsy, incompetent little fool!" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the vast room. "Do you have any idea how much this gown costs? It's more than you'll make in your pathetic little life." Alara, trembling, began to stammer an apology, but she was cut off by another voice, a voice that turned her blood to ice. Well, what do we have here?" Julian Croft, her blind date from that humiliating night, stepped forward, a malicious smirk on his polished face. He was Mrs. Davenport's nephew. "Aunt Eleanor, don't waste your breath. This is that charity case I told you about, the one with $5 to her name, trying to scam her way into a decent life," the crowd murmured, their eyes a mixture of pity and cruel amusement. Alara stood frozen, trapped in a spotlight of public humiliation, the scene from the cafe replaying on a scale she couldn't have imagined. She was surrounded, defenseless. She was shattered. And then, a new presence cut through the tension. Alistair Finch moved through the crowd, which parted for him as if by magic. He was no longer the gentle, unassuming man from the park. He was the commanding CEO, an aura of calm, absolute power radiating from him. He stopped directly in front of Alara, positioning himself as a shield between her and her accusers. The hush in the ballroom deepened. He fixed his cold, unwavering gaze on Mrs. Davenport. "Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "That is quite enough." He then turned his steely eyes to Julian. "And you will be silent." He didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. Julian paled, his smirk vanishing. Alistair then addressed the entire room, his voice ringing with authority and a profound, raw emotion. "This woman, Alara Vance," he began, placing a gentle, protective hand on Alara's shoulder, "is not a charity case. She is the guest of honor." A wave of confused murmurs swept the room. "Several months ago," Alistair continued, his voice resonating with power, "I was in a very dark place. I was a stranger in a cafe, with nothing but my own grief for company. This woman, who had just been cruelly insulted by a man with no character," he shot a withering glare at Julian, "and who had only $5 to her name, bought me a cup of tea. She performed an act of pure, selfless kindness with no expectation of reward. That single act may very well have saved my life." He let the words hang in the air, their weight settling on the shocked audience. "Finch Enterprises is making an additional $10 million donation to this evening's charity," he announced, "and it will be made in the name of Alara Vance." He paused, letting the gasp subside. "Furthermore, I am personally offering Ms. Vance a position as the new director of the Finch Foundation, where she will oversee all our charitable giving, because I can think of no one with more integrity, compassion, or moral clarity to do the job." He looked from the stunned, speechless face of Mrs. Davenport to the ashen, horrified face of Julian. The power dynamic had not just been reversed. It had been obliterated. Without another word to the stunned crowd, Alistair gently took Alara's hand. Her fingers were ice-cold and trembling in his. He led her away from the gawking faces, through a side door and into a quiet, empty study. The sounds of the gala were a muffled, distant roar. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering lamp, casting long shadows on the walls lined with leather-bound books. He guided her to a plush velvet armchair and knelt before her. She was in shock, her eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears, her face pale. She was staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. "Alistair," she whispered, her voice a fragile, broken thing. "The Finch Foundation? Finch Enterprises? Yes," he said softly, his thumbs gently stroking the back of her hands. "I'm sorry I wasn't honest with you about who I was. I wanted you to know me. The man, not the money." He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he carefully extracted 2 items: the small, dog-eared photograph of his wife and daughter, and the flimsy, crumpled receipt from the cafe. He placed the receipt in her palm. "I've kept this with me every day," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's my most prized possession. It's the reminder that light exists." The full truth of it all crashed down on her then. The anonymous donations, the clerical error with her rent, the box of medicine for Lily. It was all him. He had been her guardian angel all along. A sob, a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude, finally broke free. "Why?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Why would you do all of that for me?" He looked up at her, and the raw, undeniable love in his eyes took her breath away. "Because from the moment you showed me that selfless kindness, I started to fall in love with you, Alara," he confessed, his voice tender and unwavering. "I fell in love with your pure heart, your quiet strength, your incredible resilience. You see the good in people. You are the good in the world." He rose and gently tilted her chin up, using his handkerchief to wipe away her tears. "You and Lily will never have to worry about anything ever again," he vowed. "The best doctors in the world are already reviewing her case. A new home is waiting for you both. A new life. You saved me from the darkness, Alara Vance. Let me be your safe harbor. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you how much you are worth." And then, he leaned in and captured her lips in a kiss that was not about passion, but about promise. It was a kiss of profound gratitude, of sacred healing, of a love that had been forged in hardship and redeemed by a simple act of kindness. It was the beginning of everything. 1 year later, the sun, a brilliant, golden orb, streamed through the large bay windows of a beautiful, welcoming home. It wasn't a sterile, cavernous mansion, but a house filled with light, laughter, and the scent of fresh-cut flowers and baking bread. In the lush green garden outside, 2 little girls were chasing butterflies, their joyous shrieks echoing in the warm afternoon air. One was Amelia, her face bright with happiness, no longer shadowed by grief. The other was Lily, her cheeks rosy with health, her legs strong and steady as she ran. The experimental treatment, funded by the Finch Foundation, had been a complete success. She was cured. Inside, in a sun-drenched studio filled with canvases and the vibrant smell of oil paints, Alara stood before an easel. A streak of cerulean blue was dashed across her cheek, and her expression was one of serene concentration. She was no longer the pale, haunted woman in a threadbare coat. She glowed with health, happiness, and a deep, unshakable sense of peace. Her dream, so long deferred, was now her reality. She was an artist, her work already gaining praise for its emotional depth and vibrant use of color. The soft click of the front door announced Alistair's arrival. He came home early every day now, the commanding CEO transforming into a loving husband and father the moment he stepped across the threshold. He found Alara in her studio and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder as he looked at the painting she was working on. It was a portrait of the 2 little girls, laughing together in the garden, bathed in golden light. "It's beautiful," he murmured, his voice full of love and awe. "Everything is beautiful now," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. The love that passed between them was a quiet, steady thing, a deep and unspoken language. They had healed each other's shattered pieces, creating a new whole that was stronger and more beautiful than before. Later that evening, they all sat down for dinner around a large wooden table. The conversation was simple, easy, punctuated by the girls' happy chatter. Amelia was telling a story about her day at school, and Lily was excitedly describing the new book Alara had bought her. Alistair watched his family, his heart swelling with a profound, cathartic gratitude that felt infinite. He had all the wealth and power in the world, but he knew with every fiber of his being that his greatest treasure was here, in this warm, love-filled room. He caught Alara's eye across the table. She smiled, a radiant, sincere smile that reached the depths of his soul. In her eyes he saw his home. He saw his salvation. He saw his forever. On a quiet Sunday, they did something they now did once a season. They drove out of the city to two separate cemeteries that were only a few miles apart. First, they visited the simple graves of Alara's parents. She and Lily laid a bouquet of wildflowers, and Alara spoke to them softly, telling them about her art, about Lily's health, about the wonderful man who had come into their lives. There were no tears of grief, only tears of peaceful remembrance and gratitude. Alistair and Amelia stood back respectfully, a silent, supportive presence. Then, they drove to the more ornate cemetery where Sarah was buried. This time, it was Alistair and Amelia who approached the polished marble headstone. Alistair told Sarah about Alara, about how she had brought color back into his world and had become a wonderful mother to Amelia. Amelia told her mother about Lily, her new sister and best friend. Alara and Lily stood back, their hands clasped together, offering the same quiet support. It was not an act of sadness, but one of integration. They were not replacing their lost loved ones, but weaving their memories into the beautiful new tapestry of their family. On the drive home, with the two girls asleep in the back seat, Alara rested her head on Alistair's shoulder. "I was thinking," she said softly, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "This house is so big, and our hearts are so full. Maybe there's room for one more." Alistair looked at her, his eyes widening slightly before breaking into a radiant smile. He knew she wasn't talking about a pet. He placed a hand on her still flat stomach, a look of profound, sacred joy on his face. Their pasts were a part of them, but their future was a bright, open road, a new life waiting to be welcomed into the unwavering safety and warmth of their love. The story was complete. Their happily ever after was just beginning. This story of Alara and Alistair serves as a powerful testament to the universe's mysterious and often miraculous ways. It is a fable for our times, a reminder that the true measure of a person's worth is not found in their bank account or their social standing, but in the quiet dignity of their character and the selfless compassion they show to others. Alara, in her state of dignified desperation, possessed a wealth that no currency can define, a pure and innocent heart. Her single, unsolicited act of kindness, born from a moment of pure empathy, was a stone tossed into the still, dark waters of a man's grief. She did not know it, but the ripples from that small gesture would grow into a seismic wave of salvation, one that would not only rescue her from her hardship, but would also heal a shattered family and build a new one from the foundations of love and mutual respect. It demonstrates that one need not have material possessions to give the most valuable gifts. A moment of warmth, a gesture of understanding, a flicker of light in someone else's darkness. Alistair, in turn, shows us that true power lies not in commanding boardrooms, but in the gentle, protective strength used to lift someone up. His wealth became a mere tool to enact the much deeper healing his heart yearned to provide. Their journey from shared tragedy to profound romantic fulfillment is a cathartic blueprint for how two broken souls can piece each other back together, creating a bond that is unbreakable. They did not erase their scars. They honored them, and in doing so, they found a love that was all the more beautiful for its resilience. Their story is an echo of a universal truth. Kindness is a currency that never loses its value, and a selfless heart is the most precious treasure one can ever hope to find. If this story touched your heart and reaffirmed your faith in the power of goodness, we hope you'll carry its message with you. In a world that can often feel cold and transactional, remember the quiet strength of Alara and the renewed purpose of Alistair. Let their journey inspire you to look for the moments where you, too, can be a light for someone lost in the shadows, to recognize that even the smallest act of generosity can have a profound and life-altering impact. Every one of us has the capacity to be a hidden savior for someone else, and every one of us, in our moments of suffering, can hold on to the hope that a virtuous spirit will eventually be seen and rewarded in the most unexpected and beautiful of ways. We invite you to keep this feeling alive and join our community of viewers who cherish stories that celebrate the enduring strength of the human heart. For more soul-stirring tales of love, redemption, and the miraculous connections that bind us all, please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. Your support allows us to continue bringing you these heartwarming and inspiring narratives. We'll see you in the next one.